Well, welcome back, everyone. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Mr. Brian Kohl. Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks for
Yeah,
having me on. It's always good to talk stories and whatever else you want to discuss.
whatever else pops up. My pleasure. Yeah. So, quick introduction from you on you. You have a BA from New St. Andrews College here in Moscow, Idaho, and then you have a creative and critical writing degree from Oxford.
Yep, master's. That's my master's. Yep.
And you were a teacher and now are the CEO and video star at Canon Press.
No, one of those things is correct, but yes, no, I teach a little for the NSA Camperdown Writers Kiln in my work as an editor, and I'm CEO at Canon. That's correct. Yeah.
There you go. So we'll start with, like, what is the definition of creative writing? How is that different from any other? Because it feels like all writing is creative.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're actually accurate. I would have flipped the question back on you and said, what are you looking for? Because it depends on what you want here. I think the goal when we mean creative writing, generally we're referring specifically to fiction, and so things that telling the truth with things that are not true. And so that's kind of the direction that we push at Canon Press. One of the imprints that I helped start was Cannonball Books, which is specifically a fiction imprint. So if our God tells stories, and he does, then we want to be people who can tell stories as well. So, yeah.
And that's necessary for everyone, correct?
Well, I think it's unavoidable. Yeah. Now, I don't think writing is necessary for everybody.
Right.
I do think being creative is. So there's something about human that you can really tell if you are not suited for a particular job you're in. Oftentimes, you can tell that you have lost creativity, and you aren't trying to problem solve anymore. You're just kind of head down, working your way forward. And so there's kind of a non-writing example of, we're sub creators, to use Tolkien word, and sub creation is kind of human. If you don't do it, you're not human.
Why is it necessary for everyone to engage in, read, potentially produce fiction stories?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't think it's necessary for everybody. In fact, I've read some where I would say, please stop. Please don't. Please cease creating.
Right. Or at least stop sharing it with us.
Yeah. So, sure.
You can make them and then throw them in the garbage.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good lesson. Share it with whoever wants to read it, but please stay out of my inbox.
Your kind mother.
Yeah, exactly. Share it with your mom. But no, I'm joking. I generally get very kind people in my inbox that I would hate to discuss. What I would say. What's necessary here is stories. As you mentioned, in one half of, this might have been before we started rolling, but one half of the stories are Soul Food Podcast, and so we talk a lot about how fiction is one way that you nourish and push your own soul. Right? It's creative pursuits in that way are sort of your intellectual workout. The thing that pushes you in an intellectual direction. And so, sure, you don't have to do it just in the same way as you don't have to work out, right? That's kind of would be my answer.
Right, but it is necessary for the correct formation of someone.
Oh,
right.
Okay, so you're kind of asking what happens if you don't ever read stories,
right? If we were in a world where fiction was not a thing, what would that look like?
That's a fun happenstance. I think actually. One way I might flip it back is like, what kind of world would we have if all the food was the same? Right. So we've got some sci-fi examples here. Yeah, it'd be bland. I'm not sure that we'd know it, how much we were missing.
Right.
I think another example, what happened if you were in a world where, take a Wall-E example. We're all in the pod. If we're the pod people and we never have to walk on our own 2 feet, what do you miss? And I think it's the loss of being a whole person might be the quick answer.
Why is that?
No, you're pushing me into how I think again it comes back to how we're made. In Plato's Republic, he wanted to get rid of the poets because he thought they were all dangerous. So if our goal is to be dangerous, we need to be creative.
Yeah. Well, Plato had other problems with his Republic, But why is it that, like, poetry is seen as dangerous, and often books are the first things that are banned in when Hitler took over Nazi Germany? One of the things he was famous for is burning the books.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
Yeah, I don't know. I actually just I've been working my way through some Pulitzer Prize winners just to kind of see, this is what the Academy says, the best of the best, right? So I want to be able to um I wanted to look through. So one of them I started to read is one of the books that turns out to be one of the most banned books in the U.S., which is Toni Morrison's Beloved, which is a book about a slave woman after the war. In order to prevent her child from being dragged back into slavery, she slit her 2-year-old's throat. Right, so that's the setup for this story. Okay,
Okay.
super dark story, a lot of explicit stuff throughout it, and that's one of the books that often gets held up as this is a banned book. And so, basically, what I found is that it meant that people thought it shouldn't be in high school libraries, which I would agree with. So I guess your
Yeah.
question is, why are books on the cutting edge of things that get banned? I think the answer is because they're subversive. They're a left-hand form of power. So they're not a soldier who's going to stand up or a rebel who's going to stand on a barricade, but there's something that turns whole groups of people silently without you being able to control it. So if I have to guess why I would not want people to read books is because books make you ask questions that perhaps people don't want you asking.
Right. And and the right is also against some books, as in schools, the
Yeah.
pornographic and
Yep.
those
So I
kinds
mean,
of
that's
things.
what I was trying to say here. I think as a parent, you're always trying to push your kids in the right direction, and so the idea of banning books is not inherently wrong. We do it all the time. You ban books simply by not reading them. If I can change the metaphor, by choosing not to read a book, that's in a sense you're refusing to be shaped by it or encounter its ideas, and that's positive in many instances.
Yeah, shadow banning
Uh,
is a real thing.
sure, sure.
How are books necessary and um this is an interesting topic because
Okay,
like
so
books are one of those things where
here's a
it's
I've got a question for you. So the question would be, I guess the way that I phrase it is that I tend to find that reading fiction allows you to view things in a different way than reading nonfiction. And if you miss out on that, that's fine. But it also tends to stunt your direction. It can stunt your ability to see how other people react. It can also stunt your view of the world. So humans, we like to get, if say you're just completely focused on one thing for your whole life. Um, we know that kind of story. That one thing becomes an idol. Books are a way of helping you see perspective from a different way and can kind of get away from that laser focused perspective on something that can turn into an idol.
right. Yeah. So why is it that like our books today are generally quite bad?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Are you referring to just when you see the books that are selling millions and millions of copies? Is
Yes,
that what
and
you're
for
referring
instance,
to?
back in the 1900s, it felt like the books that everyone read
Mhm.
were Tolkien, were Lewis, like the Lord of the Rings, and it seems that we've lost the creativity, and that also shows in TV and film. But you mentioned the Pulitzer Prize, like the Pulitzer Prize books,
Mhm.
from what I've seen, don't seem to be the kinds of things that we will be reading in 100 years.
Yeah, as I was doing my survey, if I went back through every decade of the Pulitzer Prize winning books, there are probably one, two, three per decade that I'd heard of. And that's probably embarrassing to admit, but also a sign that it's a kind of an elitist thing. They describe themselves distinguished. Um, if there's kind of a twofold question here, if you're asking why are our pop culture books so bad, right? So why are 50 Shades of Grey so bad? Why is Divergent, Gone Girl, I think is another one. These are all ones that sold 8-9 million copies over the past decade, right?
Right.
Why are these bad? I don't know. I mean, in some of that, it's just a sense there's an ease of books. Pop culture always exists, and so your question is perhaps the same as why is so much tiny theater in the 1800s kind of bad, or was it? I don't know.
Right.
I think our question of why do we generally in our circles look at what's on the theater and think, or what the new movies that are coming out and think, why is that so poor? I do think it's tied with generally a decline in education. It's a sign of the loss of virtue and the loss of education that our whole country is experiencing. It's a sign of decay. Um,
Right. And you mentioned like books are seen as a little bit of an elitist thing.
uh-huh.
And one of the signs of, a redneck, someone who's not as elite, is that they often are anti-book, and often are somewhat against that form of education. What happened there, and why have we lost the love of books?
Oh man, good question. I don't know. I'm just gonna say I don't know when I'm not sure. I think it has
Fair
to do with
enough.
education. I recently saw an article the, that was tracking the just the sheer loss of quantity, right? So of English books assigned in schools. So we're reading fewer and fewer English books in schools. Part of that's driven by
English
ability.
being
Uh,
like England,
like
or
think
literally
oh sorry
the American
the
language.
American language, so like in English classes around the country,
Got it.
right? So in
Yep.
an English class around the country, the number of books kids have been reading has been dropping.
Right.
Some of that's done simply because it's hard to get through a book, and you have to I don't know if you were forced to read Moby Dick, but
I was,
eh,
yes. I'm still struggling with that.
yeah, that trauma
Yes.
is something it takes a while to get past. But that book takes a large investment from teacher and students in order to get through.
Right.
If you don't have students and families that understand the value of that, the idea or the push to cut Moby Dick is going to be pretty strong. That's happened across the culture over
Yeah.
time. People read less. They like to read less, and then also there's the you might say the woke emphasis to get rid of what we view as the best, a lot of the dead white guy literature, and try to read stuff that's by underrepresented minorities, and that generally has led to so far a decline in quality. So, for example, when Toni Morrison, she won the National Book Award for Beloved, that book that I recently gave up reading. Um, she
Somewhat reasonably.
won the National Book Award. Oh no, sorry, she won the Pulitzer Prize, but did not
Got it.
win the National Book Award. And there was a big group of folks that put together a letter saying, a protest letter functionally, that she should have won, and then it was a crime that she hadn't won. Right. So that's an example, sort of, some of the other forces that are driving not just what is interesting to read, but what's happening in our culture.
And we're not saying that like because it was written by white guys, it's the best.
No,
But
yeah.
it is interesting that all of the best books seem to be written by white guys, which
As
is
far as the Western canon is concerned,
yeah.
Western culture and what literature is trying to do. Sure, you've got your classics from other cultures that you can read as well. But the works that have stood the test of time and that we stand up to are books from the Western canon. And again, it doesn't have to do with their ethnicity. It wasn't that their whiteness was coming out onto the page and that's what made it great or something ridiculous like that. But it was there's we should be focusing on the quality of the books themselves, the writing quality, not on who is writing them.
Right. You mentioned a little bit back that like this is part they've lost this center of their education.
Mm-hmm.
Why have we why have we shifted away from books? Right? We used to read more. Why should we continue to see Moby Dick as valuable?
Yeah, well, we've moved away because kids just aren't as capable. Literacy rates, writing. A lot of parents don't understand the value of reading books either. They don't read to their kids. The single highest indicator you can have for whether your kid is going to be successful in school or not. Again, this is correlation, not necessarily causation. But if you read to your kids, so kids who are in a home where they're read to, a certain number of words, who hear certain number of read words by the time they're 2 or 4, are going to be in that upper echelon of educated kids later. Now, obviously, there's other factors that go into it.
Right.
A home that's going to read is also going to have other factors that tend to help with that education. But really, that single indicator of do you read to your kids is one of the biggest head starts you can give to them.
And interestingly, like they don't read to the kids in schools either. And they
Yeah.
don't start out the kids with smaller fiction, less difficult to read. Like we
Mhm.
don't start them out with Dr. Seuss anymore, and progress them all the way to reading Moby Dick.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we've lost a big so for education again with Canon, we actually just came out with our own Chickadee Reader series. The goal is really to start with like tiny kids books that actually have some narrative arc and a bite that you want to try to read, that
Right.
hopefully get kids hooked on this idea that reading isn't a chore like math that you just plug and chug, right? But instead reading is something that's a pathway to getting something. It's like if someone offered you a cookie, would you eat it? That's how you should feel about a story. You
But
know,
at the same time, you were talking about like it is working out your mind in a
yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Yep. Good. I think I was saying that a little tongue in cheek about math because all the math people I know would say, "Hey, math isn't like that either. It works. You know, it's not just plug and chug. Saxon is the worst. You know, those are the kind of things we say.
Right.
If you're a math person, same thing about stories. It is working out your mind, but we don't read stories in order to try and get mind biceps. We're reading stories for the same reason that you'd eat a great meal rather than the slop, right? So, like, say, the same sci-fi thing. Why would you choose to have a world with good meals in it versus a meal where there's only one nutrient-rich slop that we eat all the time? I mean, the question answers itself. Sure, it's for
Right.
nutrition,
Why
but
did
so much
God
more.
make all of this diversity of, plants, wildlife, animals?
Yeah.
Because he wanted to.
Right.
And that reflects into how we should act.
Yeah, in some way, it reflects his glory. It reflects goodness. So the question of when he said this is good, the variety had an awful lot to do with it, because Moses goes through lists and lists of things that God made. All of these kinds of creatures. There's no area that God thought would not be improved by having biodiversity in
Lots more.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
more critters.
What did the Western canon have to do with creating Western culture? How are those two linked?
I don't know. I don't know. Again, that's your question of correlation and causation. Um, I think it's art is often our intellectual outworking of what we believe, right? So or I should say, it's art is the beauty aspect of our outworking of our culture, right? So when you have a culture that's a full, complete, mature one, it will express itself artistically in literature and art that is true, good, and beautiful. That's kind of our answer right there. So the answer of why do those things work out? I mean, you can read a history of education for that. I don't have the specific facts of that, of exactly how that works, but that is sort of what we as Christians, and especially as a publisher, I find valuable about book publishing is we're trying to preserve that and trying to produce that and trying to give authors an option or a place for themselves to publish.
Right. What is the value of, as we were talking about Moby Dick, and also some of these people that built the Western civilization through their literature were not explicitly Christian?
Mm-hmm.
What is the value? How can Christians glean the value from that, while not gleaning some of the other bad parts of it? Right.
Yeah, I mean, just the same way that we glean value from a meal that has an ingredient that we don't particularly like, right? There's things that you leave out. You can take the sprig of rosemary off the top of the steak and still eat the steak, if you don't like rosemary, right? An example, perhaps a better example for that is Origen asked that question. What has Athens to do with Jerusalem? Functionally, what does philosophy have to do with Christianity? What does the pagan secular world have to do with how the religious are to act? And the answer really has been answered many times throughout church history and Christian history is that you take the good and you leave the bad. You chew up the meat, spit out the bones, you keep the baby, you throw out the bathwater. These are things that wisdom does, recognizes the true good and beautiful and leaves out the not so true good and beautiful.
Right. And for those people who would say, why don't we just find books that are only true, good, and beautiful? What's the value of actually reading stuff that is
Yeah.
sometimes
Okay.
not?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of Christian literature that's tagged as Christian literature is unfortunately not artistically challenging enough to be beautiful, right?
Right.
So it'll be good, right? It tries to inspire morality, but it actually fails to be true because it doesn't reckon with how the world actually works. If we're talking, say, the one of the genres here that a lot of Christians will read would be the Amish romance, so the light romance, right? So we're talking a romance story that's not heavy, so it doesn't have anything inappropriate in it, but
Yeah.
it does have the repeated story of the unloved girl in a strange situation is loved by a desirable character, and over the course of the story they eventually end up married. Like, those are the types of stories that write themselves. AI could actually do a pretty decent job working through those stories, and that sort of method, although you say, yeah, it's good, it's traditional in that sense. We've got basic gender roles. There's no weird pronouns in these stories. It's
Right.
about a girl marrying a guy and living happily ever after.
Yay.
They're not actually mature, or in that sense finding wisdom. They're not aesthetically skilled in that way. So the true good beautiful triangle, they fail on 2 out of the 3 corners.
So and some of these non-Christians or non-Christian books do not fail on those, where they are more
Sure.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Why is it that so many non-Christians seem to understand that beautiful part even if they don't understand the truth?
Yeah. Um Again, the why question is a tricky one. I think because there's a good chunk of non-Christians that understand that being excellent is its own reward, right? Now, ultimately, it's not. But if you're going to pursue something to be the best that you can in your particular thing, you will be successful generally, right? If you have the Kobe mentality applied to books, you're going to pursue being the best, the most excellent possible. And unfortunately, I think Christians cut ourselves a pass. A lot of times parents are partly to blame because we want to find things that are healthy and good for our kids. And so we take shortcuts. So rather than helping them find good stories, we're going to make sure we know that we find safe stories. Or rather than helping them a story, doing the hard work of sorting through, um, a book that has pick something like Harry Potter, for example, with which would be a solid fiction. I've read some of them to my kids. You have to work through the question of witches and magic as a Christian, but that's easy. You work through it. How many Christians look at that and think, "Hey, I'd rather read something that is safe to read"? You know, same thing with the magic in Lord of the Rings or Narnia. And that's the one side. So you've got the people who are really obsessed with being hyper careful and overly scrupulous and want only safe, nice fiction. On the other hand, we have the people who are the vacuums who will watch anything that come out on the screen. And both of those, again, use our food metaphor that we're so fond of making. You don't do that with food. If you are,
You're probably either obese or anorexic.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're not healthy in
You got
between.
it. Yes, you
Right.
got it. Yeah.
What is the healthy balance there?
Uh, um, don't eat too much of any particular thing. Keep your, I think we've got a whole, back to our canon question. I do work for a publisher called Canon Press, and part of that is the canon of literature, not just the canon of scripture, but also the canon of literature more broadly. We have a good list of what thousands of years, hundreds of years of people said is great fiction. Make sure you're consuming that regularly.
Yeah. Why are Christians so concerned with safe?
Well, we're trying to do a good job.
Right.
It really is. They're trying to be faithful. They hear verses like great verses like, whatever is true, of good report, think on these things.
Right.
And they think, all right, that means that I leave out anything that is borderline on any topic that's my particular one. So magic, they'll think, I know witches are bad in real life. Okay, so I know
Right.
wizards are bad in real life.
Right.
Therefore, Lord of the Rings is off because it's got a wizard. Right. And again, it's kind of the Pharisee thing applied to books. You're making a fence before the actual law of God because you're worried that you're going to break the law of God.
Right. Where in reality, the word of God is the fence.
Yep. The word of God is the fence. And then I think too, God tells stories in a much more aggressive and dangerous way than we do. And although it's easy to get into trouble and read things you shouldn't, it's also easy to go the other direction and end up with a flabby mind, or a mind that's only happy to eat Wonder Bread.
Right. If wizards are not great in real life, why are they great in stories?
Right. Yeah. Oh, is that a real question?
That is a real,
Yes.
yeah.
um, uh, I mean, I think because Gandalf is telling us more truth about how the world works and about how God works and works through stories, than could be told without Gandalf. So the question is basically like, look at Gandalf. What do we learn from Gandalf? And the question of why are we allowed to do things differently in fictional worlds? Because that's how God made it. There's what ifs that we could ask about many of the different things that God's created. What if this whole world is contrived and created in particular ways that do beg that question of what if it were different?
Right. And we shouldn't be scared of the what ifs.
Yeah,
Correct?
I don't think so. Yeah. I think in fact part of our relationship with time as humans is that question of what if it had been different. And that's both a creative one. It can be a challenging one if it's you're wishing to fix something in the past. It's also a hopeful one as we look toward the future. And then also I think it's just a creative one of, what if we could fly?
Right.
What if gravity was so much lower on Earth that we could jump really, really high? It's much more like Jupiter. Like even that, God's kind of asking us to make that question. Oh, sorry, not Jupiter, Saturn. Yeah.
Not that we could jump
Jupiter,
on Saturn.
yeah.
Yeah.
On the Jupiter one, we'd all be tiny and extremely muscular because the gravity is
Yes.
so much
Well, I wouldn't
so
mind
much
that
stronger.
either.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, what are those elements that make up a great story? And how do you craft a good story that is both truthful and beautiful?
Yeah, that's a fun question. I mean, I think we're getting into story structure. I wanted to pull up specifically, there's really only one way to tell a good story, and all stories are 5-act, basically. There's 5 acts that a story can have. All stories are broken down into 5 acts, and really they're the same 5 acts. You can't really do a story except in, if we're going off of, again, there are different people that have done this, but if you're going off of Christopher Booker's formulation, then you've got your anticipation stage first, you've got your dream stage, you have your frustration stage, you have your nightmare stage, and then you finally have resolution. And really all stories follow those 5 different acts from beginning to end. So that's just how God has made good stories to work. There are certain, so that's the short answer. You just need 5 acts and you've got a good story.
Just need 5 acts. But there are also like the Amish stories. I don't know why are they called Amish?
Well,
by the way?
they're usually set in Amish communities. It's just Amish romance.
Oh, really?
It's a genre. Yeah,
Interesting.
it's just a genre. It's
The
a
more you
genre
know.
of clean fiction, right? So
Okay.
it goes into particularly, it speaks specifically to the Amish culture because the idea is we're resisting modern problems. If you set it in, it
Got it,
has
yeah.
traditional morality, strong sense of community and home, all things which are positive, but again, focused in on it. It's Wonder Bread in that way.
Yeah. But they do have the 5 elements of story.
Sure.
Correct?
Yeah.
So
sure.
what is
Sure.
why is that story not beautiful?
Well, I'm trying to think of a good example of maybe we should move from the Amish romance into um into I'm trying to think, let's pick a different book that would be more worth talking about here. Let's say we grab, I mean, the short answer is just going to be it's badly written. It's not a good story. The characters don't make decisions that make sense. It doesn't tell the truth about life. The writing is poor. The dialogue is bad. The pacing is probably the best thing going for it, right? So it moves quickly through this story. You get the regular beats so that you feel like you're eating a good story, but it doesn't really deliver perhaps that the excellence of a story that a more challenging story.
The nutritional value.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Or not necessarily even nutrition, but just the delight, right? The good food. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's trained through time?
Well, yeah. So as a writer, you're going to, I mean, all you have to do is come to the MFA and we'll teach you how to write that way. No.
Oh, there you go.
To get our sales pitch in here. If we're taking something, we've used Lord of the Rings. If we jump into other context, right? Like, in theater here, your question of, why is the Minions movie not as good as Shrek?
I've never seen Shrek.
Well, Shrek 5 is coming out this summer.
Maybe that's where I start.
No,
That's where the
please don't.
obsession begins.
But also, let me keep going here. Why is the Minions movie not as good as Shrek, which is not as good as, we can put all of our comedic movies into different context here and make value judgments. We do it in every other area of life. But it's somehow when we jump into the art world, everybody says it's subjective. You're not allowed to make those clear judgments.
When did that subjectivity obsession become a thing?
Oh, okay. Well, you tell me if I'm going too far astray here, but it was intentionally broken off, right? So if we're talking in the 1900s, the formalists really wanted to take a scientific method and apply it to literature. So they wanted, instead of the classical view of the world, which is that in some way God is related to truth, right? So God and is himself truth, right? So truth comes from God,
Right.
is in some way borrowing from God. The formalists wanted us to focus on our world around here. And so they wanted to treat literature and focus on its form, okay? Which meant that they broke apart the idea that truth is connected to what we write. And instead they want to use physical methods to help determine what language means. And they really did this in the matter of scientific study of words. So if a word for red in, say my pants are blue in English, but in other languages, I'm going to use a different word, that means the words themselves are not related to meaning. In some sense, they're a label put on top.
Got
Okay,
it.
so I'm wandering. Just give me
Which
a
is
sec.
a little bit Plato.
Well, yeah, give me a sec. We'll get through this. Okay, so Plato would have been further back, where he's fine with connecting truth to the words themselves, right? Even he'd say that my pants partake in blueness, and that's our connection. Formalists say no. Actually, whatever this is, different languages are going to talk about it in different ways. There's nothing inherent related to the blueness of my pants that connect with reality. Once you've broken off that ability of the words themselves to connect to truth, it's pretty easy to say that the truth doesn't matter, which is what happened after we moved from the modern formalists into the postmoderns. So that's really where the story came from, is that we've moved to the postmoderns that then say, since there's no connection between words and actual truth, therefore truth doesn't actually matter as far as words are concerned, and we get reader response theory, where readers can choose what a text means rather than the text itself telling you what it means. And that's kind of the real big start of our problems. That was a really fast overview of the answer to your question of how did we ruin it all. But that's it. That's it.
How do we unruin it all? How do we get back to objectivity being a real thing?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think as Christians, you just got to raise your kids right. Right. So we start with that. Schools do it, publishers do it, and bit by bit, a little leaven works through the dough. So that's how I think we do it, is by actually paying attention to the one word that matters and living out of that.
Yeah. How much of our current struggle can be blamed on the fact that we don't really value stories and books anymore?
Yeah. I mean, I think we do. I just think we value the wrong ones. I don't think it has to do with some sort of idea that books were on this pedestal in the 1900s and we took it off, and that's where our problems came from. I'm stealing from others now, but the idea of artists being a leading indicator, so kind of the first thing that goes wrong when a culture is crashing, I think holds true. So when you watch our artists and watch our authors crashing and burning, and lots of middle class folks reacting and being like, "Ooh, I don't like that," it's a sign that your culture's in trouble, right? It's the leading indicator that you're heading down. Now, our culture has at root problems are just we don't worship God anymore. We've got our own selves up on there, and so the answer is, well, just return to Christ and everything would be great again.
Yeah. Why are the artists the first to go?
Yeah, I don't know. Something about culture, I have a feeling. I think artists tend to push exploration. They tend to push a focus on self. The emotional boundaries are things they're much happier to cross traditional mores in their art as they're pursuing a particular idea. They're pretty single-minded individuals. I think all those things tend to mean that the guardrails that would tend to keep the middle class and people further back from a problem are something that artists are more happy to cross.
How do we rein in our artists?
I mean, I think, as a creator or as someone who is working to create art, you need to make sure that you are pursuing a better view of the ultimate question of, does God like what you're working on? Basically working and creating in the presence of the creator, and never get this idea that somehow you are separate from the creator or working on your own stuff.
Right.
And once that's pursued, I mean, I think you can go in any direction you want. The whole world is given to us to create, to make, to find, discover. And that's really it. Yeah.
Disney just came out with their latest show from Marvel called, I think it's Agatha, and they
Okay.
announced that it was the gayest Marvel thing yet. Why do they keep making movies or TV shows that they announce as like their promotion is, this is the gayest thing yet?
Yeah. Well, if there's one thing Disney is good at, it's making money, right?
That is true.
So they're fantastic
They
at
do
it.
love that.
They've been struggling lately, but they've got Bob Iger back in charge. And if you know Disney's good at anything, it's good at making money. So your question too, why do Disney keep making things billed as the gayest movie ever, is that they're making money from it. So someone's paying for it. The DEI initiatives, the government subsidies, people, the press of being one on the leading edge, supposedly, of the DEI initiatives or what we're looking for, it still has a very high social value in America. So,
But we aren't watching, like the traditional Disney fan base is not watching these movies. The traditional Disney fan base.
so they've
being
lost some money,
families.
on Disney Plus. But actually, I mean, it'd be interesting if you pull up some of their latest releases and just check the box office scores. But for the receipts for some of their latest movies, but people are still watching movies. I don't think people are saying no.
Right, but people are not necessarily watching them in theaters like Lightyear did quite badly. I know that they're pulling back on some of the gay stuff in
Yeah, they canceled that
Inside Out,
what's
whatever
that
it
Jedi
is.
store, the Jedi.
Oh yeah,
the
yeah,
new Jedi
Acolyte
one.
or
Yeah,
something.
the Acolyte.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
canceled that. I think they've found that they overstepped themselves a little bit, and that when a director comes out and says, "I'm intentionally trying to make a movie that men will hate," right? That's still a bad idea.
Yes, that's 50% of your population.
But I don't think that means Disney learned specifically anything about storytelling. I think it means they realized, well, we're going to make money by doing
This is
half the way there.
not as conducive to infinite riches.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. How do we get them to understand that we actually want good stories?
Well, okay, let me put you on the spot for a little bit. How many, maybe you have the right answer to this. How many of the Marvel movies have you watched?
A
lot?
I've
or a
watched
few?
basically.
All
I
of
haven't
them?
watched anything since Endgame, but before that, I'd
Nice.
watched
Good.
like the originals.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
then I
Good.
haven't watched anything else.
So that's not the truth for the majority of the United States. The majority of the United States faithfully lines up and watches all of the Marvel movies.
right.
So the answer is that we need more people who understand, hey, wow, Endgame was not worth it. There was nothing interesting being done here. Yes, this is the kind of story that has to do, if we're talking about our story types, this is a fun one. What is the kind here? The story type that started with Beowulf, the overcoming the monster story, defeating Thanos, right? That right there is a great story type, but they did a bad job of this. This is functionally a mashup of a billion different storylines into one, with insane cop outs to get you to the end, and a Deus Ex Machina that doesn't make sense. Like, all of those things there are things that do not bother the vast majority of moviegoers.
But at the same time, Disney has been losing, and Marvel have been losing box office results. Like Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness 2 or 3 or wherever they are, did not. I saw the headline that was like it bombed in the box office, and that continues to be a headline.
Yeah,
that it is bombing in the box
Right.
office. So they are receiving some pushback.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the pushback may be they need to try something. What they'll be seeing from this is we need to try a little bit different. I don't think they're going to be taking the lesson that, we need to do more Top Gun Maverick. I think their lesson will be like, sure, we can get conservative audiences with this type of story. We need to try something new for our superhero audiences because they're a little burned out on Marvel. I think
Right.
that's the kind of audience analysis that I think Disney is doing. But I don't think they're looking at it and seeing some sort of victory for great story or sort of a defeat for bad storytelling when they look at a box office thing. They would say, oh, you know what? Doctor Strange, Universe of Madness, it's just a little too niche, right? Already a bad superhero. That doesn't quite make sense. That we're already trying to steal basically an Iron Man aesthetic and stick it onto a character with what does he have? Telekinesis, a bunch of
I
those.
don't know. I think you can go different
Yeah,
places with portals.
yeah,
and
yeah.
move
So sort of
time,
a mind,
or used to be able to move time or something.
a time guy. Yeah, I think they're gonna look at it more and say, yeah, sorry, Benedict Cumberbatch doesn't pull everybody in like he used to.
No more for the Cabbage Patch.
Yeah.
You love Beowulf. It's
Yeah.
on like all of your LinkedIn and
Oh
social
wow. Yeah.
profiles.
Well, yep.
What's your obsession with Beowulf?
What I would say, no, I don't have an obsession with Beowulf, but I did love the cover art. And around, as a publisher, I think our goal is often to hang arms on the wall. So I would like to have Grendel arms on the wall. And so depending on what stage of development we're in, the ability to take Grendel's arm and put it up on the wall, I think, is actually what's going on. So it's more of an inside note to self, you know?
Make Grendel's arm.
Yeah.
Make
Yeah.
good
It's
enough.
a reminder to self to be like, hey, have I ripped Grendel's arm off yet? Or
Grendel's arm being like literally physically Grendel's arm, or
No. I'm not telling you what Grendel would be in the situation. It's a metaphor, right? So
Yeah.
depending on the situation, I'll be like, hey, am I actually going for Grendel's arm right now? Or am I still in the stage of where we're not trying? We're going to sleep in the hallway and people keep eating. You know, the monster keeps eating some of the guys.
Yep.
And we're not actually going after the monster, holding on tight and taking the arm off.
I mean, that's true for every story, though. Every superhero.
Yeah.
Like there's complacence, and then
Yeah.
Why Beowulf?
I do like that. I mean, Seamus Haney's translation was pretty masterful. I think Beowulf is deeply Anglo-Saxon at root. It helps explain where our culture is. The idea of telling a fantasy story that comes out of the biblical background, sort of the soil of the Bible, you know, Grendel being a descendant of Cain, that appeals to me as well. So, and then I thought the cover art was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Got some good blurbs on that book.
What is the biggest thing you see creative writers struggle with at the moment?
I think taste. Yeah.
Meaning
they like bad things.
Okay.
And they
That's not
don't
great.
like good ones. And that usually when you tell somebody, hey, your taste is bad, their response is to get offended. Rather than if Gordon Ramsay comes up to me and I say, hey, I really liked this particular food. And Gordon Ramsay says to me, no, that food actually really stunk. That's not how you make that. You know, that's a bad food. You know,
Right.
like the Twinkie is not good, right? A Twinkie is a gross food. It tastes like this. And in fact, what you should be looking for is this. I would immediately be like, Gordon Ramsay, you know what you're talking about.
Right.
I agree. I'm sorry. I have bad taste. We have too many creators who are not chasing after good. You know, they're not in their mind. They're very into this is what I like, and what I like is what I'm going to pursue without asking, do I like something good? So again, it's that aspect of like, does God like what I like, or am I just going to watch Office reruns because I really like The Office? Now I do like The Office. I don't know if you saw they're coming out with another
Australian,
Office.
yes,
Yeah,
where everyone's female.
Everyone's female. Yeah, Michael
course.
Scott.
And it's
Dwight.
not funny.
I think Jim is still the Jim character is still male.
I don't know. I saw angry people in the comments, and that's when I was
well,
like,
the preview was pretty excruciating. It just wasn't. I wasn't funny.
I can imagine.
Again, it's one of those things they do. If you watch all three of the Rey trilogy for Star Wars, if you watch all three of their previews or trailers, you can watch how shot for shot they copied each one of them and did them exactly the same, down to the level of spaceship taking off, spaceship landing. They had a formula they're clearly trying to run. Same thing with this Office reboot. They said the formula is what made The Office work well. We have the incompetent boss. We have the conniving but dedicated Dwight character who's has no morals except has a very high honor code, right? So very high honor code there. And then we also have ultimately The Office is a comedy that revolves around the romance of the two finally getting together, right? That's kind of the functioning of The Office with the other characters around them. But they thought the truth was in the format. The goodness of The Office was in the format, and they think they could just do it again.
Why are people so like? What happened that we are copy pasting everything?
Well,
Where
I
did we
actually
lose
think
the
we've always
creative?
been doing that. I think that's actually a time honored truth that works very
Okay.
well in literature. So when Shakespeare goes in and writes Romeo and Juliet stealing from Pyramus and Thisbe, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, are you good at it or bad? When Gordon Ramsay, does the Yorkshire pudding and then deconstructs it for you, you'd be like, that's awesome. Thank you for taking a classic food like a Yorkshire pudding and making it, or the beef Wellington's the other one that he does all the time, right?
The posh corn dog.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, the fancy corn dog. If you are someone who's like, well, actually, I prefer corn dogs, and then Gordon Ramsay's like,
You're an idiot.
yeah, you're an idiot. And unfortunately, in literature, I don't think we have enough people saying, you really like that, that's bad.
But part of that is also because the Pulitzer Prize winning books are not good. So in a culture where the authorities on this subject are bad at their job, what do you do? Where do you find the books and the art and the literature that is objectively good?
I mean, you got to come to Canon Press, right?
There we
go. Library's free. Library card's free. There's a lot of junk in the library, but there's a lot of
Right.
good stuff as well. Other than that, Canon Press and Cannonball Books. No, there's people who are pursuing it. You got to find it, develop your taste so that when you're searching, when you've got your metal detector out and you hear the beep beep and you know it's going to be gold down there, not necessarily something terrible.
How do you develop a good taste as an artist or a creative writer?
You got to read a lot and write a lot, and then actually do the work of assessing after you've finished consuming something. So when you watch a film and finish it, it can be really easy to just close the book functionally and move on. I would really recommend sitting down with somebody or even on your own and just talking through what happened, finding out what made it work, what kind. Again, if we're talking Christopher Booker, he says there's 7 different kinds of stories and only 7 different kinds of stories. And so every story you're in is going to be one of those kinds. So identify what kind of story they're trying to tell. If we're going off the Beowulf idea, the defeat the monster, Jaws fits in that same genre. The people say Star Wars is a little bit of those, is that same sort of thing. Defeat the Darth Vader, right?
The bad guy's always bigger.
Yeah, and that one there. And I think it has to do with what is your main character's job, like what's he trying to do? Is it more of a rebirth story, like he has to die and come back as something better? It's like Spider-Man, right? Where he becomes something better and comes back, and that's his story. He has to be transformed. Is it a voyage and return story like the Odyssey? There's all of these have modern analogs that happen. So at least identify what kind of story you're in first, and then that can help you to say, what am I looking for here? Is this a quest story where they're trying to, a classic quest where we're trying to do a particular job, or is this actually more like The Hobbit where it's a there and back again story, the voyage and return, like I talked about? So I think it starts with, we really need some basic tools for talking about stories, and that starts with not giving up right after you've watched the movie.
Right. But all stories are fundamentally somewhat the same in that you have a hero who goes through something difficult, whether that's, the quest story, Bilbo goes out of the Shire, gets the gold, struggles, gets the gold, and then comes back, is somewhat similar to
that's like saying all food is the same because it's either vegetables, protein,
it's
carbohydrates,
right. So why 7 types of story? Should we be looking to create a different kind of story?
Well, I don't think you can. Christopher Booker would say you can't.
Okay.
Yeah, he basically spent almost 4 decades basically trying to analyze all the stories and say, no, whether you believe it or not, it's still helpful. He says that I have to pull up the list. I don't have it memorized. Failure to me. But the monster story is one kind. Rags to riches is another kind of story. The quest is a third. Voyage and return, comedy, tragedy, and rebirth. Every kind of story we talk about is going to fit into one of those 7 categories. And usually it's focused on the action of the protagonist, no matter what else is going on around them. Like, what is their goal? Do they need to defeat the monster in those 5 acts that we talked about? Or do they need to go somewhere and come back? And that's what we need to talk about. You know, um, down to the levels of cartoons, you know, or is it like The Office, where it actually is a comedy, just like Much Ado About Nothing, where the goal is, despite all the problems happening, we're going to end up with a marriage, right? Is it a tragedy where, despite everything that goes on, there's some deep flaw that the main character can't get over and is going to end up dead or completely defeated?
How do you recognize what is actually great about something like The Office so that when you're creating something new, right? The Australian Office is basically copy paste but worse.
Yeah.
How do you recognize what actually made that series great and then make something new and creative out of that?
Yeah, that I don't know on The Office. I mean, again, great is a strong word for The Office. You know, like really enjoyable, I think. So maybe
Yeah.
perhaps it's some kind of, you know,
Entertaining.
it's okay to have comfort food. So I would
Right.
definitely put The Office as a kind of comfort food. If we're comparing with Parks and Rec, for example, you know, Parks and Rec has aged really badly. Now the bureaucrats have taken such a beating, and the Leslie Knope character is almost unwatchable post-COVID in a way where we kind of really didn't mind her a little more pre-COVID. So I do think the discussion of the comedic beats and, are these characters real? Like, are they actually people that you can see and identify, or do they feel like, you know, I'm going off of 2 minutes of the Australian trailer that I saw, but the Michael Scott character, the woman in the Australian one, had actually nothing likable about her, in the same way that Michael Scott, you kind of did like him despite his utter
His
failure.
best efforts.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. At least you understood him. Same thing with the Dwight character, the nerdy girl character who's you know, I think she pulls in the trailer, she pulls up the dark web, you know, which is, I don't know what that was supposed to mean, but like pulls up part of the internet you're not supposed to go on, and everybody's like, oh no, are you on the dark web? And the Dwight character's like, no, but she is. Is that funny? Like, no, I'm not sure exactly how. I'm not sure how, other than being good at writing comedy.
Right, but for something for even broader, for stories like Beowulf, how do you take what is good from that without copy pasting? Because copy pasting is, to an extent, part of the creative process. As you mentioned, there's only 7 types of stories. How do you take what is good about something and then not ruin it, or at least ruin your creation of it, by just copy pasting?
Yeah. I mean, the same way that you follow a recipe to get something good, right? You know, how do you not ruin banana bread? Well, I mean, the question would be like, well, don't ruin the banana bread. Put the right amount of baking soda in it. So I guess just practice it, try it out. If we're doing a defeat the monster story like Jaws or Harry Potter, right? Is our Voldemort character satisfying? Is Voldemort, Grendel, and the shark, you know, they've got something in common about them, but they're not copy pasted, even though they're still defeating the monster stories. You've got all of true art is found in constraint, right? So I actually when I hear there are 7 basic kinds of stories, I find that invigorating, because you've got 7 spots to try to make something awesome inside of that, right? When you hear that someone's painting a picture, they've got a frame that they're painting inside of. If they could just be on the wall and just paint, you know, that wouldn't be as exciting as, no, I've got a 32 by 48 and I've got to fill it with something awesome.
Right, borders make it worth doing, in a sense, because they constrain you.
Yeah.
How do Christians make things that are not cringy?
Yeah, taste again. Which is that question of, do you like things that are cringy? And do people know what they like? When they watch a show, do you like the right things about it? Or are you reacting to, say, you know, a lot of people really liked Stranger Things because it had a bunch of 80s nostalgia, right? Eventually that show became, if I'm remembering in season 4, just a driver for 80s nostalgia. It was nothing but 80s nostalgia, and plus the horror aspects, right? People who are watching Stranger Things in season 1, what are you liking about it? because if it's just the 80s nostalgia, then you can go to a book like, or 90s nostalgia, then you're going to really like Ready Player One, which is a book basically about 90s nostalgia. So I think identifying what's good and what you like about it, and being able to tell if you are a kind of person who has a sweet tooth, so you actually do kind of like Twinkies, which is how I kind of did like Twinkies, but I know they're not good. I shouldn't be eating them.
Or you shouldn't be eating exclusive Twinkies.
Right, sure. If I go fishing with my kids and we're out on Spring Valley, then sure, maybe a Twinkie here or there early in the morning is a good way to spend the time. But it shouldn't be something that for my birthday I'm telling my wife, could you please get Twinkies?
Just exclusively Twinkies all day long.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
How is Canon Press helping create stories that are in good taste?
It's actually hard to be a writer. Being a writer is something that takes an immense amount of focus, and also the ability to move from 0 words to 70, 80,000 words, and without letting your attention flag and your ability flag. So as a publisher, we really want to support authors. So we want to find out if you've got a good idea. We want to help you develop it, refine it, and make it better. And then when we publish it, we want to make it available to people who will like it. So really, we view ourselves as a tool for the kingdom to help Christians tell good stories and write good books for each other.
Do you think there are too many people trying to be artists as careers?
No.
Why not?
Because it'll sort itself out. The market's going to sort itself out. You can try all you want. That's like the question of, that's like saying, are there too many kids trying to make the NBA? The answer might be like, sure, but they'll sort it out over time. There's only those 400 spots in the NBA that are available.
But there are somewhat infinite spots for artists.
Not really. Not if you want to make money.
But I would say with the dawn of the internet, like you can kind of.
You can write as much as you want and post it online as much as you want. You cannot make money doing that.
True, but more people have the opportunity to, and are now seeing it as a viable career option.
So the barrier to entry as being
much
an author
lower.
is really low because you can self-publish.
Right.
The ability to make money on it, I think that's evened out a bit. So you'll see in general advances going down. So authors are being paid less. Publishers are taking more risks. Are taking fewer risks with more people, right? So lower amounts of money spent to everybody. So nobody's getting rich off writing. They're all getting low 5-figure advances if you're a beginning author. But the top 2% of writers are still the ones making all the sales. The James Pattersons of the worlds. They're the ones making all the money. That hasn't really changed.
Yeah. What's your best piece of advice for anyone watching?
Well, I think the piece of advice we want to give is just, is this advice for writers or advice for Christians?
Whoever you would like.
Any advice at all?
Yes.
Nice. Here's a good piece of advice that I was sent lately. If you have to eat a frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning. If you have to eat 2 frogs, eat the big one first. I think that's Mark Twain.
That's a good piece of advice.
Sent to me by my friend Luke.
Yeah.
So that's the piece of advice.
Especially because artists kind of struggle with the, let's just get down to business and
you've quickly gotten to the metaphor behind it. But yeah, just do the thing. And if you're going, try to enjoy stories together with other people. That's fun.
Why do artists struggle with that? Like, just get down and do the thing.
Yeah. I actually don't think they're unique in that way. I think everybody loves to put off the hard thing. Whether you're a writer, an author, whether you're working out,
maybe
whether you're sending
with
emails.
Construction, though.
Yeah. Sure. If you're running construction, the foreman shouting at you. Yeah, I guess that's probably easy.
Yeah. There you go. Where can people find you and Canon Press and all of this online?
Yep. The direction I'd like to push people is really our new digital platform, joincanonplus.com. That's the place where you can find a lot of us talking about story. You can find us talking about theology, really to try to be a lighthouse for your family wherever you are. So that's where you should find us.
There you go. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. See you guys.
Not a little.